They burned everything, then asked us what we believed. In the silence of smoldering ruins, we are left staring into the void where meaning once lived. At the very moment when our histories were silenced and our voices exiled, a harsh question demanded an answer. What is it that you believe in? This is not a question asked in innocent curiosity. It is a plea from a system desperate to control, to bind us to narratives that have long lost their substance. Before we knew of freedom, they had already conquered it. Before our voices ever gained strength, they inscribed predetermined answers into our mouths. We were raised in a landscape of fire, where the warmth of myth and memory was replaced by ash and cold command. They took our myths, our heritage, and even the language that once defined our identities. They stole our ability to choose, leaving behind only a hollow echo of belief. It is as if they demanded we construct belief from the very ruins of our lives, a task as impossible as asking ashes to build a home. In these moments of smoldering despair, we are forced to confront a bitter irony. When everything meaningful has been condemned to oblivion, how can we be expected to form a genuine conviction? When the question of what we believe comes after our sources of belief have been systematically destroyed, it is less a question of faith than it is a demand to surrender our silence. The question of belief came after the burning, and that's why it was always unfair. Those words reverberate in our minds as a reminder that we were never given a chance to truly choose. Instead, we were forced into roles designed for obedience, without the space to question or to mourn what was lost. We stand amidst the rubble of our identities, where we once found meaning in the words of freedom, justice, and resistance. Now these words have become nothing more than empty slogans, worn, overused, and stripped of their original power. Once weighty concepts have been diluted by the ceaseless demands of a system that sees them only as tools of control. Look around, the picturesque mural of freedom, the once cherished ideal of justice, articulated in impassioned cries of resistance. They have all been reduced to mere sounds, uttered without conviction. They carry no true meaning anymore. They are relics that have been repurposed as weapons for further manipulation. Imagine a city full of broken signs and faded graffiti, words scrawled in haste that no longer speak to our hearts, but rather serve as echoes from a past we no longer recognize. The words on torn fragments of paper, the very words we once clung to, now float in an atmosphere of indifference. Each word represents a promise that has been neglected, a truth that has been subverted. In these ruins, even language is a battlefield, its meaning constantly eroded by the force of overuse and the necessity of obedience. As the flames of enforced belief recede, a new landscape emerges, one defined not by loud declarations, but by a heavy, pervasive silence. This silence is born of fatigue, the exhaustion of hearts and minds measured against endless dogma, the wariness of a people repeatedly asked to choose a side in a war they never waged. We are not disillusioned, we are post-meaning. We stand at the crossroads of memory and oblivion, realizing that words are no longer trustworthy vessels of truth. They have been diminished to shadows of what they once promised, leaving us to grapple with the haunting emptiness of a shared language gone corrupt. In this slow, reflective journey through our collective sorrow, we remember those who were never swept into the battlefield of belief, the silent, the neutral, the escaped, those whose lives were not defined by the narratives imposed upon them. They remain as dust in the corridors of a history written in fire. They did not rally behind a flag or shout revolutionary chants in the streets. Their quiet defiance, their refusal to adopt a position simply for survival, speaks volumes. It is in that measured silence, that deliberate withdrawal, that the question of who we really are begins to take shape. We are the survivors who have witnessed the degradation of every sacred word, the collapse of every oath, and yet we continue to stand. In our silence, there is a protest, a rejection of the enforced narratives that have governed our lives. But as the ashes slowly settle, a pressing question remains. In a world where the guiding lights of our belief systems have been obliterated, how do we begin to rebuild? The structure of our identity has been so thoroughly dismantled that there is no clear foundation upon which to construct a new narrative. Rebuilding becomes a venture into the unknown, a task that demands more than the resurrection of old slogans or the adoption of new dogmas. It requires us, as a collective, to embrace our profound uncertainty and find dignity in our shared vulnerability. We must look to the raw, unfiltered experiences of living in a state of perpetual doubt and realize that perhaps there is a certain kind of freedom in having nothing left to hold on to. The task of reconstruction is not about resurrecting a lost faith or clinging to recycled ideas. It is about understanding that belief, in its traditional form, was never truly ours. It was imposed, a tool to maintain order, to pacify the restless, and to ensure obedience. When power demands faith merely to prevent the collapse of its own fractured narrative, it does so at the expense of our own humanity. Mandatory faith is not a gift, it is a chain. And yet, even in the midst of that enforced order, a quiet revolution stirs, a revolution not of loud proclamations, but of unspoken resilience. There is a profound truth in admitting that we no longer hold any belief that can comfort or define us. In the darkened corridors of our collective experience, we acknowledge that belief has been reduced to a survival mechanism, a weaponized tool to keep us from ever questioning the very forces that seek to control us. But there is also a stirring of hope, a hope born not of certainty, but of the courage to live without illusions. We must be brave enough to abandon the crutches of old narratives, to admit to ourselves that we choose to walk a path uncharted by creed or doctrine. This is a path that calls for an honest exploration of what it means to live authentically in a world of ruins. When we look at the defiant faces of those who have lost everything envisioned by old myths, we see both grief and determination. We see a woman standing solemnly before shattered walls, her eyes reflecting the realization that she is not defined by the symbols burned to ash. We see a man who no longer roars against the injustice of a worn-out system, but rather stands quietly, absorbing the truth that his own voice, unburdened by imposed belief, holds its own kind of power. And in the eyes of a child, where poems and simple dreams offer a glimpse of something pure, a longing for connection rather than control, we see the seeds of a new beginning. The old models of belief, of identity steeped in ritual and exclusivity, have been exhaustively used and produced nothing but division and despair. They demanded a sacrifice of our inner selves, a quiet surrender of our will to the might of untouchable authority. And now, as these relics lie scattered in the ruins of our collective experience, we are left with the challenging prospect of reimagining what it means to believe. Perhaps we do not need to be chained to a singular truth or forced by fear to fall in line with a preordained ideology. In this moment, as we gather the fragments of our lost language and shattered myths, we find a subtle liberation. It is the freedom that comes not from embracing a new doctrine, but from embracing the stark reality of our post-faith existence. The new meaning is not a banner to be raised or a creed to be followed. It is a quiet space, an unoccupied field where we can begin anew, unburdened by the weight of a history written in manipulation. We are called not to adopt another belief, but to courageously inhabit a space where silence speaks louder than hollow words. In our contemplation of the ruins, we reach a solemn understanding. The act of rebuilding must be forged through brutal honesty. We must recognize that we are not healed, that our wounds are profound, and that our uncertainties are as real as the rubble underfoot. Yet it is in this shared vulnerability, this collective namelessness, that a new form of meaning can begin to emerge. A meaning that does not disguise itself as truth, but rather stands as a quiet testament to our resilience. And so we look toward a future that is not defined by the structures of our past. We realize that to build again, we must unlearn the narratives we once clung to. In the void left by destroyed ideals, there is a possibility to rediscover meaning through our mutual experience, in the gentle interplay of doubt and hope. We need no grand slogans, no recycled ideologies, only the quiet strength to face our uncertainty and to live honestly in the aftermath of manipulated belief. Today, as we wander through the abandoned halls of certainty, we choose not to be instruments of a fallen system. Instead, we choose to reject the demand for belief that was levied upon us in the wake of devastation. We embrace the truth that our worth is not measured by faith imposed upon us, but by the courage to stand in the silence, to rebuild on the unsteady ground of our shared human experience. In that silence, in that space unclaimed by any single dogma, lies the potential for a meaning that is as fragile and honest as it is revolutionary. As we conclude this journey, remember, we do not need new beliefs. We must only have the courage to live without pretending to have one. Let us walk together into the quiet unknown, for it is only in the freedom of uncertainty that we may truly reclaim our humanity. Reflect, resist, and rebuild. Embrace the quiet. Reclaim your meaning.